Date and time are set. This Friday at 11 p.m. we will leave the European Union.
We're going to wave you goodbye.
The European Parliament approved Britain's exit and bid farewell to our MEPs for the last time. The spinning of the looming EU-UK trade talks is notched up a gear.
We have a population and a market of 450 million people. The UK, it's about 60. Who do you think has the stronger team?
So how will post-Brexit Britain conduct itself on the world stage? This week, we got a few clues.
The government has decided to allow the Chinese telecoms company Huawei to have a limited role.
Despite opposition from the United States, the UK gave the green light to Huawei.
We would never take decisions that threaten our national security or the security of our Five Eyes partners.
It wasn't just the Americans who were upset. So were leading Tory backbenchers.
The idea that we should be allowing the fox into the henhouse.
This country must never find itself in this position ever again.
The Trump administration was restrained in its response. But some American politicians claim it could imperil any US trade deal.
Hopefully the decision will be made not to go with allowing Huawei onto your network.
We can quadruple our trade.
So, will Boris Johnson resist this US demand too?
Millions of Britain visit America every year, and I would wager most eat chicken while there. These products should absolutely be included in a US-UK free trade agreement. Do you agree with him?
Absolutely. If you want a trade deal, you better make it favourable to farmers.
Boris Johnson, you are the one with the power to be able to bring Ansa Koulis back to the UK.
And there were more rows with the US over its refusal to extradite one of their citizens. In this historic week, as Britain charts a new course outside the European Union, I'll be speaking to former EU Commissioner and architect of New Labour, Peter Mandelson. And the Brexit Secretary, who resigned from Theresa May's cabinet because her deal wasn't Brexit enough, David Davis. Good evening. We're live from Westminster, where Britain is 52 hours from Brexit. We're taking back control, we're regaining our sovereignty, and those pesky Europeans can no longer boss us about. That's now the job of the Chinese, after Boris Johnson said yes to Huawei to upgrade our mobile phone system. Soon President Xi will no doubt know more about us than we know about ourselves. So farewell, Brussels. Hello, Beijing. Now, you might have thought the leader of the free world would be upset at being defied by his closest ally. An avalanche of tweets at dawn was the least to expect. But he was too busy unveiling his so-called deal of the century in the Middle East. Take care. Not so back in Blighty, where there was dissent in the ranks. The PM's honeymoon ended as senior Tory backbenchers queued up to criticise his Chinese choice. Which only goes to show that even with a majority of 80, things are not always plain sailing. Well, earlier I spoke to the former Labour Cabinet Minister, Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson, we're finally leaving the EU on Friday night. It's the moment you hope would never arrive. What will you be doing at 11 p.m?
I'll be tucked up in bed, probably reading my book, hoping to fall asleep as quickly as possible. Sleep through it.
Yeah, you tried to stop Brexit with the People's Vote campaign, and you failed. Was trying to overturn that 2016 result in retrospect, was that a mistake? Would it not have been wiser, from your point of view, to have accepted the result but campaigned for a softer Brexit?
What we were trying to do is to give the British public the opportunity, and I think the right, to sign off on the deal that the government were putting together, because I think it was very different from what had been first advertised and promised in the referendum. So it wasn't a question of stopping Brexit, it was a question of giving the public another opportunity.
You hope they would vote differently.
Look, I think the European Union has been a success for Britain. I think that it's given not just the continent but ourselves
a lot
of prosperity and a lot of peace, and I'm sorry to give up those benefits.
I'm just wondering if it was a strategic mistake.
I think that it is arguable that if we had done more to move support behind Theresa May's deal, we would have been more successful, I think, in getting Parliament to agree to attach a people's vote, a second referendum to that deal. I think the problem that we had with the people's vote is that throughout people were not absolutely sure what they would be voting on. We needed a deal to pass Parliament in order to get the second referendum. I don't think we were clear enough in supporting a deal.
Anyway, we are where we are now.
We are where we are.
You were one of the people who ran the European Union. You were a trade commissioner. On reflection, do you think that the EU establishment, people like yourself, people who did well out of the EU, do you bear some responsibility for us leaving?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's not our responsibility or our fault that a sort of national populism grew in all parts of the European Union following the financial crisis, the banking crisis in 2007 and 8. But perhaps if we had responded to that differently, for example, you know, the euro itself, the Eurozone was plunged into a fair amount of crisis. There was a crisis over sovereign debt and many other aspects of the operation of the single currency, which was a very unfavourable backcloth against which anyone could hold an in or out membership
even though we were not in,
even though we weren't in it.
Currency.
But it was a backcloth, and the second part of that backcloth, of course, was the scale of movement, immigration, asylum seekers and refugees coming from the Middle East, and that created also, I think, a very unfavourable backcloth against which we held a referendum in this country.
What are the chances, do you think, of us rejoining one day?
One day, but not immediately.
Quite a while in the future, it sounds.
I think it depends on how things go in two respects. One is what happens to us, our economy, our prosperity, our ability to grow our trade in the world, whether we are happy with the consequences or disappointed having left the European Union. But secondly, how the European Union itself changes and develops. I think that as currently constituted, I think it is unlikely that Britain will vote to rejoin the European Union anytime soon. But if the European Union changes in a way that, for example, you have a sort of, you know, a core union and an outer community of sort of member states associated with the European Union, but not in the single currency, I think that will open up a possibility for
It's a kind of associate status, isn't
yes,
it?
but not...
Sounds a while away yet.
But not the day after tomorrow.
But you say it partly depends, and I understand this, and how Britain does out. You know, if we do really badly, people might want to have second thoughts. If we do well, the argument for rejoining would be harder to sell.
And I'm not predicting
and I understand
either way which way it will go.
But shouldn't we take comfort from the fact that it is clear that the EU is rather worried about a rather competitive Britain emerging 20 miles off the coast of Calais?
Well, we're a very large economy, and we're sitting on the borders, and how we do and how we perform and the relationship that we strike with the European Union is very important to them, which is why they want to strike a very ambitious, unprecedented scale trade agreement.
Well, they seem to want to strike a deal that would stop us being the competitive threat they're worried about. They want to keep us completely aligned with existing and future EU rules. We'd simply be a rule taker. They want the European Court of Justice to be the adjudicator on whether we conform or break these rules. They seem to want to crib and confine us so that we're not a competitive threat. Why? No government could agree to that.
As a former trade commissioner, I've negotiated these deals, these agreements with third countries.
And you never asked for any of these conditions?
Of the sort, well, we did not, well, we were never offering the same benefits and the same opportunities to any third country of the sort that is envisaged for Britain in our post-membership state. But the point, I think, is this, that the EU, obviously, having left the club, can't offer us anything like the same benefits as those enjoyed by those in the club. Secondly, it can't offer us benefits which are greater than those being received by those countries with whom it has existing other trade agreements.
But it's taking a tougher line, Peter Mandelson, on the free trade deals it's done with Canada and Japan. It's taking a tougher line with Britain than it did with these countries.
We want to be more ambitious.
Well, there'll have to be a trade-off.
We want a deeper, higher scale of trade agreement. Now, if you want more rights, more preferential access to Europe's single market, then with that will come an obligation on us not to undercut European producers by lowering our standards, whether they be labour market standards or environmental or social, or change our competition rules or state aid rules that give us an advantage. Now, frankly, speaking as a former Trade Commissioner of the European Union, I can see it from their point of view, and I think you can as well.
And of course, that's their negotiating position. It may also be the position they will stick to. But from the British point of view, if they're worried that a Britain that was not fully aligned with the EU, was not subject to EU rules, was not subject to ECJ restrictions of the customs union, if it was a risk of being more dynamic economy than the European Union, surely the British government would be right to have a go, to try in that direction.
Well, the British government, not unreasonably, wants its cake and eat it. You know, it wants all the trade benefits of access, full access to the European market,
have to give up some of that.
And it wants to go its own way in a whole number of different areas. In my view, the way this will pan out is that in respect of certain sectors of the economy, we will want and will get slightly more flexibility than we would have in other sectors where our trading access is greater.
We shall see as the year goes on. Let me come to the Labour leadership, since we've got you there, and the contest that's going on. Are you surprised that none of the contenders is really prepared to repudiate Mr Corbyn or Corbynism?
Well, I think they want all of them to attract many of his supporters. So, you know, they are being careful. But, I mean, I haven't heard, apart from Rebecca Long-Bailey, who's given Jeremy Corbyn 10 out of 10, I haven't heard the other candidates exactly giving a sort of comprehensive endorsement, either of his leadership or his manifesto and the way in which he just fought the election.
I mean, if Rebecca Long-Bailey, she's widely seen as the continuity Corbyn candidate.
She is, self-avowed.
Well, she says no, but never mind, she's widely seen as that. If she were to win, would you still have a party?
We would still have a party, yes.
But not, would you?
Well, I and we would still have a party, but not one, in my view, that was heading for success at the next election.
I mean, none of the candidates. I just wonder if this surprises.
And can I explain why?
No, I think
because I think her appeal is going to be too narrow. She's going to continue with the same policies, broadly speaking, as we saw from Jeremy Corbyn, and they have already been rejected
that's what
by
lost
the public.
In December.
But also because people will have to make up their mind whether she looks and feels like an alternative prime minister.
So, if the status quo is not the route to victory, which is really what you're saying. Are you surprised that none of the candidates want to go back to the kind of Labour Party that you built with Tony Blair, which won 3 elections in a row? I mean, they all attack various parts of the Blair years. Yeah. Even Lisa Nandy, who says that you tacitly accepted Thatcherite economic conservatism. I mean,
that's palpable rubbish.
Are you surprised by that?
I mean, I've never heard of anything so ridiculous. I mean, how can you describe, as a continuation of Thatcherism, a Labour government that saw unemployment halve, that saw 1 million pensioners taken out of poverty, child poverty eliminated a quarter?
Not eliminated, but reduced.
Reduced by well over a quarter. Historically high spending and investment in public services, health and education. Continuation of Thatcher, you've got to be joking.
And yet they all attack the Blair years.
Well, I don't think that we should be fighting this leadership election through a rear-view window or a mirror. I don't think we should be looking back, because you don't win a future election by using the battle plan of the past. So I would like people to look forwards. I would like to see people debating the new challenges and circumstances we face in this country, and how the Labour Party is best going to make policies that are relevant and broaden their appeal to enough voters who we need in order to win the next election.
You're a Labour Party member still?
I am.
You have a vote?
I do.
Who are you going to vote for?
Well, I haven't finally made up my mind. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how many get on the ballot paper. I mean, for my tastes, I'm an old warhorse, so none of the candidates are New Labour enough for me. Right. But I don't want to give I'm
you
not.
said don't look in the rear mirror. That's rear mirror.
I know,
you
but
you just looked.
I can't help it.
So come
but
on,
I can't.
What are you going to go for?
I am no longer a member of this party's
So not Rebecca Long-Bailey.
I am no longer a member.
Not Lisa
I am
Nandy, who
no
you
longer
said speaks palpable nonsense.
I am no longer a member of this of the party's establishment. It's not for me to guide or suggest to anyone how they should vote. I tell you how I do want people to vote. I want them to vote for a candidate who is best able to unify the party. Secondly, broaden our appeal.
So in the final 20 seconds, tell us. You've said all that. Tell us who it is.
I want a candidate, Andrew.
Tell us.
I want a candidate, Andrew, who is going to be able to unite the party, broaden its appeal to the country, and secondly, look and feel like a future Prime Minister.
I know.
Now the party members can make up their mind.
When the old Peter Mandelson isn't going to answer my questions, I know. Time to move on. Peter Mandelson, thank you for being with us. Thank you. Now, one of those to voice their concern about the government's decision on Huawei this week is the former Brexit Secretary, David Davis. I spoke to him a little earlier. David Davis, on the basis of the best security advice, the government is giving Huawei conditional access to our 5G network rollout. What do you know that the experts don't?
Well, the first thing to say is that the public stance of the agencies, of course, is as you describe. It always supports the government. It always does. But in the day or two before the announcement, both the Defence Secretary and the Home Secretary were letting it be known publicly that they were unhappy about this. Now, I assume that means MI5 told the Home Secretary whatever they told her, and I assume the Defence Intelligence Agency told the Defence Secretary their view of it.
Well, today in the papers, the Defence Secretary and the Home Secretary supported the decision, and they've done so on the advice of their security experts. GCHQ, which is at the centre of this, more than 5 or 6, has said that they can contain it, they can manage it. They know it's a high risk, but they can handle it. They have been for a while.
Well, if it's high risk, why have it at all? You know, if it's sufficiently low risk to be manageable, why put a restraint on it? The simple truth about 5G is it's a mesh network. It's very, very difficult to say what's an outside and what's an inside. Very difficult to protect one bit from another. Now, I'm quite sure that GCHQ will be able to protect their own elements, and maybe the military net, and maybe the MOD, and maybe...
So intelligence sharing is not at risk?
That bit, well, that's not intelligence sharing is not my central argument. My central argument is this puts everybody else subject to surveillance.
But can we agree that intelligence sharing... I'll come back to the other matters, but can we agree that intelligence sharing isn't at risk? It's not done on public networks.
No, and I never argued that. I mean, I never argued that. I think, you know, I also think, frankly, Mr. Trump is a transactional player. He will do something else next week. He won't remember what happened this week when we come to talk about intelligence or trade or whatever else we talk about.
Huawei is already embedded in our 4G network.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be.
Should we be ripping that out?
Yeah, slowly. That was a mistake. I mean, I think it was a mistake to allow Huawei in at all. This company is effectively an arm of the Chinese state. And even if it wasn't, under their 2017 laws, they are required to do what the intelligence agencies of China tell them to do. You know, putting an organisation like that into the centre of any critical national network, and we're not just talking military and intelligence here, we're also talking control of electrical systems, we're talking about control of water systems, we're talking about access to your information and mine. Right. Those things matter.
But the intelligence services and GCHQ, they know all this. They've even got their own department that monitors Huawei, and they keep an eye on it. And they think that because it's conditional, because it's limited in how much it can do, it's being limited to the base stations and the antennae, that it's manageable, at least for the next couple of years.
And read what they said. Well, a couple of years. This is a long-term investment. This is not a couple of years. But
but by then they hope to bring in other players.
Well, they'll need to replace Huawei then, in that case, on your argument. Now, read what they say about the analysis they did at Banbury, where they have the joint operation with Huawei. They said, there are no overt back doors. Of course they're not. But they said the thing is very, very buggy. The software is very, very buggy, very fragile, full of errors. Yeah. In other words, it is accessible if Huawei choose to break through it.
But these were engineering faults in it. They were
software
not saying
as well.
That the Chinese intelligence was using this as back doors.
How do you know?
They had found because they haven't found it. If it had been there,
they haven't found
it would have been there.
They haven't found the explicit backdoor. These are the sorts of bugs. If you use Windows on your computer, you get downloads from Microsoft all the time. What are they there for? To prevent access through the security systems. This is exactly the same sort of problem.
But you've said you don't want Huawei to do 5G.
No.
There's no immediate alternative to it. You've said you even want to start ripping out 4G where Huawei's involved as well.
Not replacing it.
But with what, we're not so sure. Can I remind you that you were elected to deliver full fibre broadband across the country, including improving connectivity with the North? How will you deliver that on your platform?
Not at the, well. Firstly, I'll firstly answer that. Not at the price of putting national security at risk or our security at risk. But secondly, you're saying, well, there's nobody else can do it. Well, actually, Nokia and Ericsson are in this. The Australians have already got a 5G system in place. Why can nobody else do it?
Ericsson has much less capacity and is much more expensive.
Yeah, we'll have to work it up. I mean, it's going to take a year or two. We delay by a year. Is that a critical problem?
It could be a lot more than a year. Anyway, whatever the arguments, it's going to go through Parliament. You're going to vote against it?
Well, let's see what comes.
Well, you can't make all this noise about it and not.
Wait and see. Let's see what the arguments are.
Because you're in a rebellious mood. You're up against HS2 as well. Are you brewing a backbench rebellion?
These things are not decided on mood, Andrew. They decide on the facts.
Yeah, but are you up for a rebellion on this?
I'll see. I'll see what.
Resign your seat and fight on it. You've done that before.
Yeah, well, that was a rather bigger issue.
That was bigger.
It was bigger. It was bigger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's turn to Brexit.
Locking people up for 42 days without charge is quite big.
Oh, Chinese intelligence spying on us is pretty big too. Yeah. Let's turn to Brexit. We're leaving the EU on Friday, 11 p.m. You promised that we'd have a trade deal when we left. Where is it?
Well, we haven't left yet. No, I didn't promise to have a trade deal.
We're leaving in 2 days.
Well, we're still going to be within the orbit of the European institutions for the best part of another year.
Yeah, but that's all.
What I said. No, let me be precise about what I said. I said we would negotiate during this period. We wouldn't sign it. We wouldn't actually implement it. Sorry, we'd sign it. We wouldn't implement it, any trade deals, until after we've left. That's the case.
Well, let's be precise. Let's just see exactly what you said to Andrew Marr.
Is it going to be the case that during that transitional period we are still negotiating or not?
No, we would expect... Well, there might be some minor negotiation going on, but we'd expect a substantive trade deal to be struck. Not signed, because we've got to be technically outside immediately afterwards. But
there could be tinkering going on.
There'll be maybe tinkering, but the substantive deal must be struck.
So you said we'd have a substantive trade deal. No, you said it would be done before the transition period. He said, is it going to be the case that during the transition period we're still negotiating? You said no. We'd expect a substantive trade deal to be struck. There might be some tinkering, but the substantive deal must be struck. You were wrong.
No, look at maybe I misspoke there. I don't know, but look at the arguments I put throughout the entire delivery of the interim period during Parliament. I said this is the time when we will be negotiating. I made that point to Barnier because initially they weren't necessarily willing to give that, and they agreed that.
But on the same interview with Andrew Marr there, you said that a trade deal would be ready to sign the moment we leave. You said 1 minute after midnight. That is 11:01 p.m. on Friday. Where's the trade deal?
I was thinking at the end of the process, not this Friday this week.
Oh, well, you said it'd be ready to work as we were leaving.
Listen, Andrew, and I may be wrong about that, given the way things are going, but because we've only got a year, whereas before we would have had 2 years.
So did you just get it wrong?
Well, I might have done on that, but because the negotiation has been foreshortened by a year, because we didn't leave on March 29th.
Anyway, we haven't got a free trade deal, but the government hopes it's about to negotiate.
Yeah, it'll negotiate one.
And it starts once we leave on Friday. Now, it seems that the more friction-free trade that the British say they want, the more the EU will demand we stay aligned to EU rules. Would you accept that?
Well, what you're seeing now is the opening negotiation again. It's the standard stance. They know one of the things we're going to argue to them is, look, you've got this deal with Japan, you've got this deal with South Korea, you've got this deal with the Australians and New Zealanders. We want to have those sorts of deals. Why do we say that? Because we know that doesn't undermine a single market. Otherwise, it would never have negotiated. So they're starting further back. They're trying to make
But do you accept there will have to be a trade-off between the degree of friction-free trade, which is currently frictionless trade that we have, and some element of remaining aligned?
No, I don't. I mean,
then we won't get a deal.
I think we will.
What's wrong with sticking with the existing EU rules? Can you tell me, can you name a single major manufacturer that said it wants to diverge from EU rules?
First thing to say is the Brexit referendum was primarily, firstly, about democracy.
I understand.
Who controls, right? So take back control. So we have to have the right to diverge. Now, whether they actually diverge in any area is a choice for afterwards. Now, I can tell you broadly, I think we can predict reasonably what will diverge and what won't. New industries, genetics, artificial intelligence, those sorts of areas, we'll want to be writing our own rules because we're the world leaders in some of these areas.
I understand, but can I just ask again, can you name a single major British manufacturer that wants to diverge from EU rules?
Off the top of my head, no, because they've got big sunk costs in things like distribution and supply networks. Let me finish the point. If you take somewhere like car manufacturers, the SMMT was making a big fuss in the last couple of weeks on this very issue. There, I don't expect divergence to be very much at all, for a very good reason. It's based on the UNECE, that's the United Nations European Economic Commission, and we have been a signatory to that since 1964. So
in that there might not be divergence.
There won't be very much divergence.
So there could be some negotiations to do. Let me just finally ask you.
Well, you don't need to negotiate it. It will happen one way or the other.
What, in your view, is the risk at the end of this transition period of no deal, of no free trade deal? Is it 40%, 50%?
Pretty low, pretty low. And the reason I say that is because this is when Boris was first elected Prime Minister. Everybody said, "Oh, you can't reopen the withdrawal agreement," but they did reopen it. I mean, you can have arguments about whether it's good or bad, but they reopened it.
So you think we'll get a deal?
And I think the pressure will come on. And for them, what do the Germans refer to as Treasure Island? Why? Because we're the highest profitable market in Europe, most profitable market in Europe. And so, yes, we'll get the deal.
All right. David Davis, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're almost out. While we're still in, let's speak to our Europe editor, Katja Adler. Katja, the European Parliament ratified the withdrawal agreement today. How was that marked?
Well, after the vote, and this means there's no stopping Brexit now that our divorce deal has been rubber-stamped by the European Parliament. There was a breaking out of the singing of Auld Lang Syne amongst MEPs, and old acquaintances, well, us in this case, certainly won't be forgotten quickly. Ursula von der Leyen, the new European Commission President, made a declaration of love to the UK, quoting British poet George Eliot, and then our most famous MEP, Nigel Farage, he spent more than 20 years in the European Parliament, ensured that he made an unforgettable last speech telling the EU that it was finished, and then actually having his last words cut out altogether as his mic was shut off. He broke European Parliament rules by him and fellow Brexit Party MEPs waving the Union flag, and you're not allowed to wave flags of individual countries in the European Parliament.
Katja, Brussels is outlining quite a hard line at the moment. You would expect that as negotiations get underway. But it does seem to be concerned that it doesn't agree to anything that would give Britain a competitive advantage outside of the EU. Mrs. Merkel's spoken about that. Mr. Macron seems to be worried about it too. Is Brussels prepared for no deal if that's what it takes? Is it up for that?
Look, Andrew, I think no deal is definitely back on the table. We will be hearing this throughout the year. Boris Johnson says he wants these trade negotiations to be wrapped up, ratified by the end of this year. Is it possible? The EU says it is possible, but it says it will be a flimsier, thinner agreement than if the two sides had more time to negotiate. But absolutely, they're saying to the UK, if you want this FTA, this free trade agreement, then you're going to have to sign up to what they call level playing field conditions, and that is to reduce competitiveness on the UK side, so as not to endanger Dutch businesses or German businesses by saying to the UK, look, you have to match our rules when it comes to tax, for example, or environmental regulations or labour regulations. And of course, Andrew, you will have posturing at the beginning, and despite all the words of love today, the EU is convinced that it does hold most of the cards.
All right, Katja, we'll leave it there. Thank you for that. I'll be back here with Politics Live at 12:15 tomorrow on BBC Two, and of course next week with another Andrew Neil show, 7 o'clock, same time, same place. Bye-bye.